Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this June 2021 Pilot Pass session where we're going to be talking about our featured CapsimInbox microsimulation for the month, CapsimInbox Strategic Marketing. Now, for those of you that have sat in on a few of our previous webinars throughout the year, welcome back. And for those of you that may be new to CapsimInbox, new to Capsim, or perhaps just new to this Pilot Pass initiative, we welcome you to today's call. And we'll be delighted to take you through this strategic marketing version where we're not only going to talk about what students will experience in this abridged microsimulation experience, but also give you all the opportunity to test this solution completely for free with as many students as you'd like throughout the month of June. And we can even work with you to pilot this at a later term in the fall, for instance, as well. Now, to start off, I'd like to introduce our panel for today. Starting with myself, my name is Matthew Schell. I'm Capsim's Market Development Manager, where I assist all of our academic as well as corporate authors with creating their own custom microsimulation versions on the CapsimInbox authoring platform. I'm also joined today by my colleague and our Learning Experience Coordinator, Kelsey Zimmerman, and I'm very excited to introduce our featured author for today's session, James Kourmadas, who's the Clinical Professor of Marketing at the College of William and Mary. Kelsey, James, how you doing today?
Doing
Well,
fine, thanks.
hello, well,
Excellent, excellent. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. And what I thought I'd do is give you kind of a quick agenda of what we'll cover over the next 30 to 45 minutes or so. What we'd like to do in today's presentation is we'd like to first start off with some very top level information about what we're trying to achieve with CapsimInbox Strategic Marketing. What is the fictional role and scenario that the student will be placed in, a little bit about the format and the skills that we're assessing, as well as some general scenario information. From there, I'm going to hand it off to Kelsey, and she's going to walk us through kind of a top-level overview of the CapsimInbox participant experience, as well as highlighting some specific emails from strategic marketing to give you an idea of what to expect. And then from there, in the latter half of the call, I'd be happy to introduce you to James Kourmadas, where we'll talk a little bit about James's background and how he came to Capsim to work with us to create this microsimulation, and explore some of the thoughts that he had around why he wanted to create this, what was the goal he had in mind, and how he sees it best utilized. And of course, we'll close out with some information about how you can get in contact with us to try the solution yourself, as well as give you the opportunity to have any of your questions answered in a short Q&A session. So at any point during today's presentation, if you have a question, please feel free to submit that into the chat and we'll address that at the end of the call. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started by starting off by talking a little bit about what exactly is CapsimInbox Strategic Marketing. So essentially, CapsimInbox Strategic Marketing is a very special version of Inbox because it was one of the very first versions that we at Capsim looked to work with an author outside of Capsim simulations to create this. And in fact, James was one of the very first authors that approached us to create a version of CapsimInbox. And we released this just about 2 years ago on May 15th, 2019. And in this particular microsimulation, students are going to be put into the fictional role of a brand manager at a high-tech clothing manufacturer. And a great comparative company for this would be essentially like Patagonia, for example, as more of a framing. And as far as the company profile goes, we have this overarching parent company called Gorshland that owns a variety of different clothing brands. And specifically, your student will take the role of the brand manager at RG Brands specifically, where they manage their G-Force footwear line. And throughout the exercise, they're going to be working on a variety of different projects related to market research, as well as actually launching a product by looking at said market research. And then in the second half of the experience, we have an interesting situation that pops up where Amazon actually asks you to form a partnership with them. Would you like to stay in your own lane with your brand and build your own awareness, or would you like to work with Amazon to be essentially a non-branded shoe manufacturer for them? So a little bit of critical thinking built in there as well, of course. Now, in terms of the format of the microsimulation, as you can expect, this is a fairly bridged experience. We have it broken into 2 sections, and a good way to think of this is almost as if they're checkpoints, where a student can enter section 1, complete it, and then can enter section 2 at their leisure or at a predefined date that you'd like to set for that second section. And the first section, focusing primarily on market research and the product launch, is going to be roughly a 60-minute experience that we see. And section 2 is a little bit more abridged, about a 30-minute experience, because we actually asked the student to write out some emails justifying why they think they should go about the Amazon proposal in a certain way. Now, with all inboxes, we really try to put a focus on assessing key skills related to that topical area. And this version is no different. In this version in particular, we put a focus on the communication aspect of how you're handling things internally with communicating. Critical thinking is obviously a major component here as you're having to do a lot of market analysis. which brings us to the third skill. And then finally, we want to take a look at principled decision making. Are you making the most well-informed decisions with the information you have available at that point in time? And more overarchingly speaking, the scenario itself, really what the student's trying to do is help this RG Brands grow substantially. They're kind of have a stagnating footwear business, and they want to breathe new life into it with some new products and based off of some new product research. So throughout this time, they're going to be evaluating a lot of the information that's coming into them from focus groups, as well as the key target markets that are a part of RG Brands clientele, while also talking internally with different stakeholders that have different opinions, different personalities on how certain situations should be handled. So you analyze that information, make the best decision possible, and then make those recommendations to the executive team. And to give you an idea of what kind of topics, what kind of areas are we really focusing on within this version? Well, you'll be looking at things like segmentation, targeting certain particular markets, product positioning, of course, the market research component, but also looking at topics around pricing and your profit margins. And then, of course, branding and overarching marketing strategy topics. So that's a good quick 30,000 foot view of what the strategic marketing Capsim inbox experience looks like. And at this point, what I'd like to do is take a step back and let's take a look exactly at what does the Capsim inbox participant experience look like? And then we'll actually look at some key emails. So at this point, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Kelsey Zimmerman, who will take us through that stage. Kelsey?
Thanks, Matt. So I'd be happy to take you guys into an overview of Capsim Inbox as a whole. So there are three main parts of an inbox experience: the experience overview, the simulation itself, and the feedback report and skill builder. So the first thing that the participant will encounter is an experience overview that includes a self-assessment designed to gauge awareness levels and a brief description of the scenario and participant role. In this case, as Matt mentioned, a brand manager of a performance outerwear company. So they'll be prompted also to complete a self-assessment, which asks the participant to assess themselves on the skills that they will be challenged to demonstrate throughout this experience. Next, the participant will actually start the inbox experience itself, which puts them right into a day in the life of a brand manager's email inbox. And then once they complete that inbox experience, they will be immediately provided with a feedback report detailing their overall effectiveness, and as well as being presented with their skill proficiencies. Additionally, they'll get some information on their skill awareness. They'll be provided a metric that allows them to see where the discrepancies are between their perceived proficiency in their assessed skills versus how well they actually performed on those skills within the simulation. So without further ado, let's take a look at a bite-sized version of the strategic marketing inbox experience. Okay, so initially the participant will get a welcome from the CEO of RG Brands. This participant is new to the company, so they'll get a welcome. They'll also get that proposal summary, which Matt outlined briefly. This is a partnership opportunity to do some private label manufacturing for a shoe line. They'll also be given some directives from the CEO. We'll ask them to review financials, spend some time with market research, and connect with the product design and development team. From there, they'll be brought into that overall discussion related to the Amazon proposal. So they'll be looped in with some colleagues, with some interested parties who will be outlining their opinions and some data and information on that proposal that will help the participant make some more informed decisions. So I'd like to point you to these various emails from these personalities that are coming in. So they're going to be getting some various information. Here's from the CEO of Finance and Ops, who will be giving them some more financial analysis information, as well as the president of Lotus Brands, who's a subsidiary of RG, that's going to express some of her concerns regarding this proposal. So for these purposes, I'm going to drill a little bit into this email to show you some examples of possible responses. So this email in particular drills into some concerns related to the possibility that this type of proposal would limit the opportunity for future product collections, as well as some concerns related to direct competition with their current athleisure department. So if we take a look at the actual responses available, you can see that there's 3 here. There's a choice to make an instant decision to accept the proposal. And then the next few responses are asking for more clarification on her overarching concerns. So you can guess that these responses have varying levels of effectiveness. Most of the responses throughout this experience are rated on a good, better, best scale. So while the participant is making these choices on the back end, these responses are scored on the skills that Matt mentioned, like communications, marketing, and so on. The most effective answer garnering the highest scores. So the participant will continue to get further clarification from their colleagues on their concerns or the reasons why they think that they should move forward with the proposal. And then finally, the participant will be asked to make a final decision regarding Amazon. They will be asked to provide written justification based on the information that they've gathered throughout the experience. And they'll be asked to do that in written form here. So it's just a way to really bring the experience to a head and make sure that the participant really understands where the decision making was made and what sort of data they used to supply. So I hope this was helpful in giving you a peek into what types of situations the participant will experience throughout the simulation. This is just one storyline within the inbox. There are several parallel storylines, also ones that support these decisions, that they create a really realistic feel for the participant, and they do a great job of assessing their reactions to different situations. So from there, I will pass it over to Matt, who will provide a little more detail on the feedback report and the information that we share with participants on their overall performance. Matt?
Absolutely, and thank you very much there, Kelsey. I figured I'd turn my video on as well, put a face to the voice, of course. Let's actually talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about the outputs that are automatically generated from CapsimInbox immediately when a student completes the experience. So first things first, once they complete all the emails within the inbox experience, they are of course prompted to that you have completed the inbox simulation. Now let's take a look at your results. And what we're able to provide with CapsimInbox Strategic Marketing, as well as our other versions, is an instantaneous and individualized feedback report, where what we're doing is giving key feedback on 4 key areas. The first one being that we actually plot out the student's performance as an overall percentile against the general populace, the thousands upon thousands of other students around the globe that have gone through this particular version to see where they exactly stack up globally. And then secondly, what we do is we also provide a developmental index. And essentially what the developmental index does is it really speaks to, is the student picking the most proficient, the most effective response to a given email regarding what information they have at that time, of course. And then on the other metric, we look at the consistency of that proficiency through the exercise. So, did they pick the most effective response very often, or was it very inconsistent? So you'll have that kind of granular information. And as Kelsey briefly mentioned, during the onboarding process, we actually do have a self-assessment where on the 4 skills that we measure in that version, we ask them the question, relative to your peers, where do you place yourself in a percentile? So I think I'm about average with communication. I'll put myself around 50, but I think my decisions are fantastic. I'm gonna put myself in the 70th percentile, for example. And what we're able to do is we're actually able to compare that self-reported information directly with their performance in the microsimulation itself through the empirical metrics we have in place. And as a result, that brings us to the other half that's automatically generated in the feedback report. The first part being that we provide them with a self-awareness level gauge on a scale of 0 to 6, where higher scores like a 4, 5, or 6 are going to indicate that the student's perceived skills, the way they self-rated, are much closer to reality. Where lower scores like a 1 or 2, for example, could indicate that perhaps there's some overestimating or even underestimating of one's key abilities. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is that we want to actually plot out the skill gaps. So what you see on the right side of the screen is we do actually plot out where the self-assessment they put themselves at, as well as where Inbox put them at. So we can not only identify which areas are their key strengths, but we can also identify which areas are in most need for improvement. So that way we can help them develop those key skills moving forward. And in fact, for a lot of simulations out there, this is kind of where it stops. You get your feedback and that's about it. But we wanted to make sure that the feedback we give in Inbox, particularly in strategic marketing, was as basically as plentiful as possible. That way they can take their own self-directed way towards development. So what we do is after they're given this feedback is we have an individual development plan builder where they can create actionable goals to improve their skills moving forward from that point. And this is all through the use of developmental tactics. And this is particular kudos to James Kourmadas on this because he has some of the best dev tactics we have within a version of Inbox and some of the best post-simulation materials, which I'll cover in just a second here. But really the emphasis is give them the tools and the information to make their own action plan. And then they can always go through the same inbox later, say 3, 6 months, maybe even a year, or maybe even at the end of an entire program or curriculum to see the empirical longitudinal development of those skills from the first and second implementation. Now, moving back to the actual materials that we have coming with Capsim Inbox. So I would like to put a particular emphasis on that because strategic marketing has some of the best we have available. In fact, James has done fantastic work, not just on the dev tactics, but also with creating an instructor resource guide, a student resource guide, and an easy one-page integration guide. And to kind of walk you through each of these, the instructor resource is really going to focus on the main tools you have as an instructor. What are the key decisions that are going to happen throughout this simulation? What are the key outcomes? And what's the background of the company? Everything you need to be well-versed to be able to have a substantive debrief right after students complete the simulation. By extension of that, we also have discussion-based questions and a brief student guide that helps them put them in the right place as to what they should consider after the experience has been completed. And the integration guide is just a great kind of way to get a 30,000-foot view of how the simulation can be utilized and what are some of the key points during the simulation itself. And all of these are going to be available directly through your administrative portal when you have your course set up for strategic marketing. But without further ado, at this point, I'd like to introduce our author of today's session, James Kourmadas. And James, if you'd like to give a brief hello and join us on the call here real quick with the video, and then I'll kind of go through the history here, and then we'll open it up with a quick synopsis again of the scenario, and then we'll open up to Jim to kind of talk a little bit about his experience with Capsim. So first and foremost, James is the clinical professor of marketing at the College of William and Mary. And he's been teaching undergrad principle of marketing courses, as well as MBA marketing, marketing strategy, and branding courses for several years now. And why it was particularly interesting to work with James on this project was because he has a plethora of experience in a variety of different industries within marketing, working with everywhere from the chemical industry to food and retail. He also has substantive publishing experience through higher education institutions and publishing firms. He's also co-founded an environmental startup. And in addition to all that, he's also a commercial real estate and business broker as well. In terms of James' key skills and interests, really he has an emphasis on that business analysis and modeling, which you'll see a lot of that in your strategic marketing experience. Of course, as well, entrepreneurship and teaching are among his other interests. And in regards to his education, he got his bachelor's in engineering at VA Tech University and his MBA at the College of William and Mary. So James, great to have you on the call today. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, James. And really briefly, before I turn it over to James, I'd like to just give us again a quick synopsis of the scenario and key skills we're looking at here as a brief refresher. So again, we're looking at the students in the role of that brand manager at a high-tech clothing manufacturer. We've got a 2-section Capsim inbox, roughly 60 minutes and then 30 minutes, that focuses primarily on marketing, research, product launch, and then that Amazon proposal. And then in regards to the key skills, again, we're looking at assessing communications, critical thinking, marketing analysis, and principled decision making. But at this point, now that Kelsey and I have given a little bit of top-level info about the scenario, I figured I'd first turn it over to James, where he could provide a little bit of additional context to the scenario and what he was thinking of when he was creating this story. James?
Sure. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Kelsey. Okay, as you can probably see from the previous slide, I am not an academic by most of my career. I sort of came to academia with the thought in mind that I'd had a pretty wide and varied, interesting set of experiences in a number of different industries. The thing that tied it all together was marketing and the marketing concept. But I thought, wouldn't it be fun to go and begin to try to teach the sorts of things I learned? And lo and behold, I found out that among the different jobs I've had, teaching is probably one of the hardest, trickiest, and most thankless of the jobs. Mostly for the reason that it's awfully hard when you go back after 25 or 30 years of working in different scenarios to try to understand what a young student, a 20-year-old or a 25 or 30-year-old in an MBA class, what they know and what they don't know. And so when I came to the idea of doing something with Capsim on a simulation, in fact, I had used simulations previously in my courses. I'd used some of the more standard ones, MarkStrat and things like that, typical marketing strategy simulations. And what they all seemed to do in a very neat and concise way was teach you to play mathematical model games. And by that, if any of you have used these products, what you know is that there are definitely, they're all forms of optimization games where you've got a number of things that you've got to manage all at the same time. And you find out if you do too much of this and you didn't do enough of that, then you get a bad result. And it's all great. It teaches some of the mechanical, or I would say transactional aspects of marketing, but nothing out there really taught what my experience was in the real world about marketing, which is to say that in the real world in marketing, you're constantly flooded by information. You're constantly flooded by people and opinions, and oftentimes very compelling sounding people and compelling opinions. And so what is your job, as the marketing person, what is your job and how do you take all this input data and make sense of it when you actually, when you've got key decisions to make? And further, what is sort of the scope of the decisions that you ought to be making as a marketer? So when I took when I first started working with Capsim, one of the things that they introduced to me with Inbox was the idea that Inbox was really developed with the intent to develop soft skills. And we hear a lot of talk about that in academia now, about developing critical thinking and communication skills and those sorts of things, because we find it's one of the things that oftentimes young people come out of a college experience kind of lacking. They've got a lot of ability to do mathematical modeling. They've got a lot of ability to analyze situations and write great reports. What they don't come out typically with is a excellent ability to analyze a situation that is full of messy people and messy ideas and make it into something and then lead people through the change of making large decisions. So that's what I tried to focus on with the CapsimInbox, was to make it, from my own experience, as real as possible. And you'll see if you have been through the simulation yourself, or if you've talked to students who've been through it, one of the comments that we got back early on, and I actually took this as a positive comment, was to say, boy, they give you a lot of information you don't need. And hello, yeah, that is the way things work in the real world. Now, having said that, I will tell you that everything in there it has a place. There is there are bits of information in there that don't seem relevant to the decision at hand, but part of that is because you're not considering the larger decisions on the horizon that you probably need to make. And so you get a lot of information given to you by people unsolicited, and when you ask for input on things, you get a lot of information given to you that doesn't seem relevant to the current situation. Trust me, most everything in there is relevant to something. So what the purpose of the simulation is to teach people what it's like when you actually get out in the real world with your skill sets, your ability to analyze an income statement, your ability to do segmentation, positioning, and targeting, to read a research report and make sense of it and present findings and all that. But to then put that into the context of, okay, now I need to develop a strategy that's based on solving a problem that I've been tasked with solving. And so the point of the simulation is, yes, there are some things in there that seem like distractions. There are some things in there that don't seem like they're relevant to the situation. But the idea is to get the student to think through all of the things that really belong under your purview as a brand manager, and the best ways to go about gathering information efficiently to make the key decisions that you need to make. So with that in mind, the simulation starts you off with this fairly simple premise. You're brand new to the company's having some financial trouble. Your job is, well, we've got this impending decision about what products to manufacture next year, so we've got to do an exercise in product development and choosing product, which is great. And that's typically, you as a brand manager, you get thrust on your plate. As soon as you walk in the door, you get thrust on your plate a number of urgent and very imminent decisions you have to make. But at the same time, what the simulation should do as you go through and you have interaction with the other people and the information in the simulation, it should help teach you that every little decision you make, whether it seems like something something simple or tactical that you need to do, they all have some they all have some bearing upon the ultimate direction of your organization or of the sphere of influence that you've been given responsibility over. So you need to think of these things in a coordinated fashion. And so one of the things I'd recommend for anybody, if you want to try to understand what we were trying to achieve with simulation, is go through the developmental tactics booklet. That's probably the fastest way to get through an understanding of what we were trying to touch on with simulation, because it gives you the skills that we were trying to highlight, and it gives you the path by which we take students through that. And it also tells you some things about, well, the students that excel at this are the students that seem to get to the important information more quickly, and or if they get to it more quickly, then they can broaden their scope and take more information in, and they can assimilate it better and make ultimately a better decision. Because at the end of the day, this is a form of developing a marketing strategy. And so the marketing strategy piece of this, I know we all teach that in the course itself. That's part of what we used to focus on. Certainly in Principles of Marketing, you teach the strategy process. But what the simulation is intended to do is put the strategy process and the process of developing strategy in the context of kind of like a real world environment where things are not clear. You're not handed materials like a SWOT diagram and said, okay, your job is to implement the SWOT. Your job is to figure out, we need to do a SWOT analysis. Okay, so that was the idea behind the simulation.
Excellent, and thank you for that detailed description there, James. If you don't mind, and you hit on this point a little bit during that description, but if you had to kind of boil it down to, like, if there's one key benefit from both the student and the professor perspective, what would you say that particularly is with strategic marketing?
Well, I think from the student perspective, and this depends upon how you choose to use it in the course, and I envision using it one of two ways, but it's up to the individual and how you think it fits into the way you teach. You can use it as an introduction to a lot of the concepts because it touches on a good number of topics that you're going to end up teaching more in depth about. Or you can use it at the end to sort of see where the student's able to tie together all these topic areas into a cogent process for marketing strategy. And if you're going to use it as an introduction, I think the value of it is it introduces concepts in an interesting way, as opposed to you standing up at a lecture board with a diagram saying, no, this is a Porter's generic strategies model, and this is how you use it. It introduces you to that in a sort of more engaging way, and with some pressure to be able to figure out how to use it to communicate properly. For the instructor, what I thought about this when I was creating this, and I won't digress too much, but at the College of William and Mary, we've had a tendency over the years to rely a lot on Harvard cases and things, and that's just the nature of the university that we teach at. But the one thing I would say as an instructor, when you come into William and Mary, the one thing you're given the advice is, just don't change the textbook, but all the materials in your course, it's up to you. You can use anything you want. And so first off, you typically go out and you look at all the materials that are available from publishers and all that. And like most of you, I'm sure, I found it was very frustrating. A million examples don't help the situation. You need 2 or 3 good examples of a topic, because a million examples tend to distract students. And as well, what you find is that when you use a good example and by the time you get really good at using the example, it's stale and nobody understands, or the company's not even relevant to students anymore. So the thing I wanted to do for instructors with this was to give you something that has enough legs in terms of an interesting sort of company situation. And I won't mince words. I did kind of, my inspiration for this was Patagonia, and every semester I had taken to this idea of I kind of took a focus company to help me think of it as a threaded example to use throughout the semester for whatever concept you happen to be teaching. You can go back to your threaded example and say, and for the company we've been talking about all semester, this is how it applies. And so one semester used GoPro because that was, cameras were brand new. And then I went to drones with Parrot and DJI as my sort of example marketing companies. And one semester I used Patagonia. And I thought the Patagonia was so interesting to students, and Patagonia is just an interesting company and their approach to everything is interesting. I wanted to create in there sort of a counter to Patagonia. So this is Patagonia, but they went a different direction. So you'll probably see some obvious allusions in here, or you'll see some similarities to to the Gorsland Company and Patagonia Company. But to me, it's just a striking example of how two companies can coexist with totally different missions and visions in the same marketplace. They can both be successful. Obviously, one's done quite a bit better than the other, but the other one's at a crossroads, and now it's time for you to figure out where should we go next.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. Thanks for that detailed description as well, James.
Mhm.
One question that we very commonly get on our end at Capsim, I'd love to get your opinion on this, is, what are the courses where do you think this microsimulation is really best suited for? And not just kind of the common marketing courses, but in your opinion, is there any kind of other courses within the business curriculum, or maybe even outside, maybe outliers that we may not think of where this has potential applications? Any thoughts there?
It's tough because a lot of this is very specific to marketing strategy. But honestly, any leadership, business leadership course where marketing is an aspect of the job, and this goes to the nature of the marketing discipline. And as you saw in my dossier of my corporate or I should say work experience, I worked in a number of different industries, and I will tell you, in the many different industries, your title doesn't even have the word marketing in it, but a lot of your job has these functionalities to it. So I was business unit director here. I was a chief marketing officer for McGraw-Hill and publishing, McGraw-Hill Higher Education. In the chemicals industry, I was a sales manager, business manager, sales rep. All of these, there were aspects of this brand manager role in all of those jobs I had, even though they didn't have the title marketing or marketing manager or brand manager. And so what I would say is that you find when you get to a certain level of success within a large organization, you end up dealing with the concepts that you will see presented here as brand management concepts. But by and large, we just happen to call them brand management and marketing because that's it's a nice way to package it up and teach it. But in the real world, you'll find oftentimes that people that are making these kinds of decisions and the people that have this sort of responsibility, they may not even have the word marketing in their title. So I think there's application. There's a lot of application for mid to senior level management with the concepts presented here. In terms of academic, I really do. It probably is best to keep this within the realm of marketing discipline. Or one flip side, and this is just a quick interesting aside, and then I'll drop it. But what I found at the College of William and Mary is a lot of the students coming in were either sort of pre-selected as, well, I'm going to be a marketing major, or I'm going to be a finance major, or I'm going to be an operations manager or major. What I found was interesting was the kind of natural polar opposite of a marketing major was a finance major, because they were the people that were coming into the course with a preconception that, well, this whole course is kind of baloney anyway. Marketing is just it's just fancy way to make people do things that they don't want to do. Finance is really the core of everything, and companies and the world runs on finance. What I found interesting, and this is why I say what I say about this in particular with finance, a fair number of finance people came to me after going through the experiences like we present here in the brand management simulation, and it literally had changed their attitude about finance and about marketing and basically about strategy. And so I guess the whole idea is when you package things up for academic use, they need to fit nicely into tight little boxes, because that's what universities present is this course, and this is the scope of this course and that. However, I would say the concepts transcend the packaging of courses and disciplines. Certainly, finance majors got a lot out of this experience, and so with that in mind, I guess maybe that's a long answer to your question, but.
Hey, not a problem at all. I appreciate that. In fact, I mean, kind of just building on what you were saying, I mean, the positive reception we've gotten from this, James, has been pretty phenomenal. I mean, we see this used at the undergraduate level as in those principal marketing kind of intro courses, while at the same time, we see this as kind of like an intro level activity at the graduate level as well.
Mm-hmm.
And across the board, the experience has been very positive, particularly on the immersion of this experience. I mean, really relying on a lot of the time you put into creating this kind of fictional universe to really make it as realistic as possible. And I think that in this particular version, it really puts an emphasis too on from like more of an authoring kind of design style, giving the different people you're interacting with different personalities, different types of communication methods, and being able to kind of consider those when they're giving you key decisions. Because a lot of times the people that you're talking to are well above you in terms of the organizational chart, let's just say. So
You
being
bet.
able to take that into account as well. And in fact, I can kind of second this too, not just from experiences that we've seen with strategic marketing with some of our clients that are currently using it, but we've also seen strategic marketing as well as the CapsimInbox platform as a whole really highlighted with some external validation as well. In fact, we're very happy to say that just over the last year or so, this CapsimInbox, which a lot of it's owed to strategic marketing, has brought us in quite a few accolades in particular, specifically on the EdTech Awards side. Last year, we were able to pick up the Trendsetter Award for the product or service setting a trend, as well as the Best Professional Skills Solution Cool Tool for that year too. And in fact, just 2 months ago, we were able to pick up another award this year for the Cool Tool for Best Corporate Training Solution, because as James had alluded to, we actually get significant interest from a lot of HR representatives and learning and development representatives from major corporations on these simulations as essentially almost like a role preview or as a part of role-based training. Basically, you name it, inbox, whether it's academia informing corporate or corporate informing academia, we see uses on both sides there. And then towards the holidays as well, we're happy to pick up 2 Brandon Hall Group awards, gold medals for this, for both the best advanced in gaming or simulation technology, and as well as for the very authoring platform that James utilized to create this solution, the CapsimInbox authoring platform that picked up the award for the best advanced in content authoring technology. So it's very exciting to get these awards. However, at the same time, we realize that at the end of the day, it needs to be a good fit, not just for your course, but for your particular teaching style. So kind of moving towards the end of today's presentation, what we want to do is give you as much access to try CapsimInbox strategic marketing as possible. So if you'd like to connect with any of us, we'd be happy to give you a one-on-one demonstration where we can go much more in detail into the key concepts we cover, as well as talking to you about how you can implement this in your course and so on. We're also going to provide the recording of today's demonstration along with a PDF version of this presentation deck. And you can see here that on this final slide, you can actually click that hyperlink there. And what it'll do is it'll bring you to a registration page where you can immediately create a demo student account. So that way you can go through the entire experience from start to finish from that very perspective. And then of course, now it's a little bit into summer and everything, but for any summer courses out there, if you would like to pilot this with your students, we're more than happy to give you access to as many students as you'd like for as often as you'd like during the month of June. And then on the right side of the screen, I do of course include our contact info if you'd like to contact Kelsey or I directly. But also, James is kind enough to provide his contact info as well. If you have any particular question for him in terms of, how he further kind of designed the simulation and what kind of real experiences from his corporate experience that he breathed into the simulation. And then down at the bottom, we've also got a hyperlink there too if you want to learn more about the pilot pass in general and to see what versions we previously focused on. And of course, we're going to be adding a new one for each month, which we go ahead and announce a week prior to the start of each month. So stay tuned for those. But at this time, we'd be happy to take any questions you have for either James or myself or Kelsey that we'd be happy to respond to. I'll just give everybody a couple seconds to input and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, James, I do see one question here submitted already right off the bat. Where would I put this simulation in my semester? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think here's what I would advise on that. Where is your biggest problem, I guess? Where is the problem in introducing concepts? Would you rather, the real question is, would you rather use it to softly introduce concepts, in which case you're not going to use it really strongly as an assessment tool? I would recommend you put it within the first 3 weeks. And so what you're doing is you're going to give the students an overwhelming experience because you really haven't covered, much of any of the material. But that's okay, because what you're doing is you're using the simulation to, give them a taste of what marketing is like at a mid to senior level. And at the same time, you're introducing a lot of concepts, which then you can go back and touch on, and throughout the semester, you can thread back to the story and say, well, remember when we talked about this and you had to make these choices for the product launch? What was the methodology that we used to choose the products? And so I think you can use it early in the course to introduce concepts, and I would say within the first 3 weeks, or you can use it later on in the course once you've gotten through a good number of the topic areas. You can use it to see whether you use that more as an assessment tool to figure out whether students seem to be absorbing and being able to put into use the concepts that you've covered.
Excellent, excellent. And feel free to submit any more questions at this time as well. I do see we have another one here. Pretty straightforward question, James. How would I grade this in terms of like assessment? Any suggestions there?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. We always had in my course, I'm talking about the undergrad principles of marketing course, there was always this bit of gray area in the total percentages. We used to have 2 exams, a midterm and a final. We had a final project, which was a team presentation. And then you had this sort of amorphous zone of about 10% you could do whatever you want with. And some instructors made that into a homework percentage. Some of them made it into a general class engagement, which I always found a bit dicey because I tried it for a couple semesters, and you basically the idea was you keep track of who's contributing in class and who's not. And let me tell you that those are some of the hardest points not to give out because every student feels like they contribute in class. So for me, I used it as a replacement for that 10% of gray area that people used to use for class participation or homework or whatever else. And I would essentially, what I really be looking for out of the simulation will give the student marks on the 4 skill areas, but you really don't want, in my opinion, you don't want to use that as a way to grade the student. What you really want is you really want to assess the student's level of how much did they put into the effort. So for instance, the simulation at several points asks you to write justified emails or emails that justify the larger decisions that you have to make. And I understand nobody wants to read 100, believe me, one semester I tried doing the 10% doing an essay. And we also tried using a Harvard case and you're writing a 3 to 5 page essay on the Harvard case. Nobody wants to read 150. If you've got, like me at that point, I had 3 sections of 50. Nobody wants to read 150 of those. I do think it's a little more manageable if you're reading this 2 emails out of the system for each student, and what you can boil it down to a quick rubric of I'm looking for 1, did they even use any of the information they were given, or 2, how well did they use it, how cogent is their argument. I think you can come up with a pretty manageable rubric for just reviewing the emails that are output from the system. And if that's the way I would use it, I think at this point for grading purposes. But I would use it for that gray part of the course where you usually use it for class participation or homework or something like that.
Absolutely. And if I could just add to that too a bit, James, I mean, what's kind of nice about the written responses, again, they are fairly brief. There's only 2 or 3 within the entire exercise. We do keep it fairly limited there. What's nice about these is that they're easily viewable within your administrative portal. And if you would like to assign a separate grade, kind of focusing more on the justification, we do have a completely separate score on a scale of 0 to 100 that you can provide for each written response. That way, if you'd like to rely on that a bit more than the empirical based scoring that we have inputted, and of course, all of this information is easily exportable via CSV file after the fact as well, including the responses. And also a key point to mention is that the students themselves, they'll be able to review their responses by looking at their portal when they're looking at their feedback report as well. So, some great insight there. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions here, James. Just prior to the call, you and I had a little bit of a conversation around like accreditation, for instance. And this is something that's come up in previous Pilot Pass webinars. Love to get your opinion on, for organizations like AACSB, for example, or ACBSP. Do you see Inbox playing any particular role when it comes to accreditation from your perspective?
Well, I'll tell you that was one of the key. It was one of my key overarching guidelines in creating it was if you cannot track something, at least again where I was teaching, the College of William & Mary, if you cannot track something via the learning objectives that you've set for the course, then the idea was then that's something you need to get rid of in the course, because everything ultimately in the course needs to be able to be tied back to stated learning objectives. But that's an AACSB kind of modality, and What I don't know is amongst our participating, participants in the group here, how many of you AACSB plays a large role in the accreditation of your college or not, or ABCSB, whoever your particular governing body is. But I would say at William & Mary, AACSB, we were, this is going back to 2018, was when we were kind of really getting in the swing, because we were heading for one of the audit periods where they were going to look at, AACSB was going to actually look at all of our documentation for how well we had written out learning objectives and the amount of crossover from course to course and all this. So the reason I picked the very 4 skill areas that I picked was because you can track these to, these were trackable to our learning objectives via our AACSB experience. So analysis was one of them, marketing analysis in this case, critical thinking, communications, and principled decision making were all AACSB sanctioned learning objectives for a course like marketing. So that's where I started. I was very mindful of that in trying to create then the scenario that would help you assess whether students were actually achieving levels of success in these 4 areas. So if you have questions as to how these might tie to AACSB or how you might use this to tie to your own course learning objectives, again, I would urge you to go back and look at the developmental tactics. It's intended for a student to understand, what the simulation does for them, but it's actually, I think it's an equally good resource for an instructor to understand how this ties to those 4 learning objectives.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you for the insight there as well, James. One final question for you to kind of put a cap on today's presentation. Basically, if you wanted everybody to take away one thing regarding CapsimInbox strategic marketing specifically, what do you think it would be?
Marketing is hard enough to teach. It's just a hard course to teach because it's constantly evolving. It's constantly evolving, and there are a lot of people I think are very good at teaching the models and teaching the thought process and all that. But unfortunately, in the course itself, usually you don't have time. You just simply don't have time to immerse students the way that you would like to immerse students in the real world of marketing. And I know, I'm sure there's some amongst our participants in the group here, there's some very innovative ideas you have going on about how maybe you do live cases or you take students out and you have them work with local companies on specific projects and things like that. This to me was intended to be a tool kind of, and maybe it's not your plan A, but it's a plan, if nothing else, it's a great plan B backup tool for really immersing students in real world aspect of the discipline. And for marketing, it is not, unlike some other disciplines, it really is all about on the job learning and on the job skills and on the job training. You can teach the concept in the classroom, but you'd be amazed how many people get out in the real world having taken marketing as a major, and they can't make the connection of how to apply it to their situation. So that's what this is intended to do, is really immerse students in as close as you can get in a classroom in a short period of time, a real world situation where it really feels like you're doing something when you make these decisions. And so that was my intent with it. And again, we have very discerning students here at the College of William & Mary, and so they don't like their time to be wasted. So I wanted to create something that I felt would be worthy of not wasting their time.
Excellent. Well, I certainly think you achieved that with this version, James, and I think that all of you would be delighted to take a look at this. I think you'd feel the same way as well. But with the close of today's presentation on CapsimInbox strategic marketing, I'd first like to thank Kelsey Zimmerman for focusing on the student perspective and giving us a few sample emails. I'd like to give a big thanks to James Kourmadas for being on the call with us today to kind of talk through his version and his thought process for creating it. And then most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your time today. I hope that you found this to be beneficial, and we hope to be in contact with you shortly to give it a test try yourself. And again, if you'd like to pilot this with any of your students, if you'd like to try it yourself firsthand, or if you'd like to contact us directly to see how it works best in your course, feel free to connect with us at any time. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. See you, everyone.
Thanks.